All right, it's time to talk again about some of these coaches on the hot seat who could find themselves out of a job here sometime between now and the start of next college football season. If you look at the calendar, we're heading towards the end of October into the beginning of November. You got Halloween coming up. A lot of teams have bye weeks over the next couple of weeks. And because of the way the college football calendar is structured nowadays, with a signing day the second week in December, followed immediately by the opening of the first transfer portal window, we're starting to see teams fire coaches earlier in the season every single year. And it's kind of starting now. We've had some coordinators starting to be fired. Of course, Brent Venables at Oklahoma has fired his offensive coordinator. We're going to talk a little bit about that and Brent Venables in Oklahoma too in this video here. But what I want to do first is kind of go through a rundown, take our minds back to the off season before any games were played this season, and kind of the list of names that people had in their head for coaches who could find themselves in trouble some point this season in terms of getting fired, okay? And it's a pretty long list of names. Some of them I thought were ridiculous then. Some of them I agreed with. We're going to kind of just, again, these are sort of names that heading into the season were on everyone's kind of radar to potentially run into some trouble. And I think the best place to start is going to be right here with Florida and Billy Napier. Now, this is Billy Napier's third year, okay? But, of course, each of his first 2 years were losing seasons. You go back to 2022, his first year there, 6-7. Last year, 2023, 5-7. And, of course, this year, they did get a win over Kentucky this past weekend, but they're currently sitting at 4-3. And they are getting ready to start that stretch of games that everyone has been talking about for about a year now since this schedule was announced, okay? So they have a bye week coming up. And then they've got Georgia at a neutral site, on the road at Texas, home against LSU, home against Ole Miss, and on the road at Florida State. Now, the good news for Billy Napier is that this Florida State game that looked like a guaranteed loss 6 months ago now looks like a guaranteed win. They're terrible. And we're going to talk about Mike Norvell in a second here, too. But they're going to be massive underdogs in these other four games: Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and then they'll be a favorite probably on the road at Florida State. So, again, right now, Florida is 4-3. They would need to win 2 games to become bowl eligible, which means they're going to have to pull off a major upset. Let's give them a win at Florida State. That would put them at 5 wins. They then need to beat one of these 4 teams in order to become bowl eligible. And remember, they were 5-7 last year. So if they get to a 6th win this year, not only would that mean bowl eligibility, it would mean an increase in total wins over last year, or as some people might say, a step in the right direction. So a couple of questions. Do you think Billy Napier can win one of these 4 games, Georgia, Texas, LSU, or Ole Miss? We're going to assume they beat Florida State for a 5th win. I don't know that they can win any of these 4. Second question. Even if he does win one of these 4 games and finishes at 6-6, bowl eligibility, a 1-win increase over last year, do you think 6-6 is enough to save his job at Florida? Now, if I'm a Florida fan, I want him gone. I don't think Billy Napier knows what he's doing. I don't think he's a very good coach. I think if he was, they would have won at Tennessee a couple of weeks ago. There's just plenty of examples. I don't think he's a good coach. And what you don't want is for something to happen here at the end of the year that forces Florida to keep him and not be able to move on, and sort of delaying the inevitable. I've been saying for about a year and a half that I thought Billy Napier would be fired at the end of his 3rd year. I'm going to stick with that. I think Florida will make a change at head coach before the start of next season. When will it occur? What if they lose by 30 to Georgia? Would it happen then? What about on the road at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss? I don't know. I don't know. But Billy Napier was a name talked about in the offseason as being on the hot seat. I think it was legitimate back then. I think it's legitimate now. I think he's in serious danger. I think he's in serious danger of losing his job. Now, let's talk about somebody that was on the hot seat in the offseason that is no longer on that hot seat. And this is one of the better stories in college football this year. I'm talking about Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lee. Vanderbilt is sitting at 5-2. They've got more wins right now than Florida does. They need one more win to become bowl eligible. And unlike Billy Napier at Florida, the expectations are different at Vandy. becoming bowl eligible at Vandy is a guarantee. Well, first of all, Clark Lee is no longer on the hot seat. We can just scratch that off. I think that's safe to say. He was on most people's list of hot seat coaches heading into the season. I think it's safe to say he's no longer on that list. They got a big win to start the season against Virginia Tech, a close loss to Missouri in double overtime, and then, of course, they pulled off the win against Alabama and followed that up with a win on the road at Kentucky. They've since beat Ball State. Now they've got Texas at home this weekend, and a lot of people are pointing to that game. They beat Bama the week after Bama played Georgia. Now they get Texas the week after Texas plays Georgia. I'd be surprised if Vanderbilt beats Texas, but I was surprised they beat Alabama, so it doesn't mean they can't do it. I'm not going to pick Vandy to do it, but I would assume Texas wins there. But they could win on the road at Auburn. I think the South Carolina game will be competitive. And then they're likely to lose these last two to LSU and Tennessee. But the point is, I think Vanderbilt's getting to a minimum of 6, maybe 7 wins here. Over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And clearly a program like Vanderbilt has, like I said, totally different expectations than what should be the case at a place like Florida. So you can't just say, well, if Clark Lee winning 6 or 7 games is enough to save his job, why isn't it enough to save Billy Napier's job? We're talking about Florida and Vanderbilt here. If you don't understand the difference between those two programs and the expectations and the things that come along with this, then I don't know what to tell you, but winning 6 or 7 games a year at Florida for multiple years in a row is unacceptable. And Napier hasn't even done that. He's had a losing record every single year he's been there. And he's likely to have another losing season this year. 5-7 right now looks like the most likely record for Florida. Although if they can pull off an upset, it is possible they can get to 6-6. But so Billy Napier, I think, still on the list. Clark Lee, probably time to scratch him off. Now here's another guy that was on a lot of people's preseason hot seat list. Another SEC coach, our old buddy Sam Pittman. Now, if you look at Arkansas over the last couple of years, of course, it hasn't been great. You go back to 2023, last season, they were 4-8. Not good at all. Now, that resulted, of course, in Arkansas bringing in Bobby Petrino, bringing him back as offensive coordinator up under Sam Pittman. And it has paid some dividends, I think. I mean, whatever you might think about Arkansas as a team or their record overall, which is 4-3, 2-2 in the SEC, their offense is improved drastically over what we saw last year. Even this loss here in week 2 to Oklahoma State, they had 650 yards of total offense. Now, it was a coaching disaster in the second half of that game, and some of that's got to fall on Sam Pittman. But point is, the offense, bringing Petrino in has helped them offensively. I don't think there's anybody that could argue against that. They don't really have a bad loss, right? They lost to Texas A&M by 4. Don't we all know Texas A&M's a pretty good team now? I think some people forget that this game ever happened, because this was the week. Was this the week before? This was the week before Texas A&M destroyed Missouri, and everybody kind of started paying attention to Texas A&M again. You remember Texas A&M had lost in week 1 to Notre Dame, and people kind of wrote them off, and then they just reeled off a bunch of wins. 4-point loss to Texas A&M. That's not a bad loss. Now, I'm not trying to pat Arkansas on the head. You got to win these games, not lose them. But the point is, when you talk about a guy, is he going to get fired or not? At Arkansas, I would put Arkansas's expectations somewhere in between a place like Vandy and Florida, the previous 2 programs that we talked about, right? I don't think it's fair for many people to hold Arkansas to a standard of like playoffs or bust, right? They're not Bama or Ohio State or Georgia or whatever the case. I also think it's fair to hold them to a higher standard than Vandy, right? So, lose to Texas A&M, their big win, of course, their upset win coming at home against Tennessee, that 19-14 win. And then they kind of got outmatched this past weekend against LSU, losing that one 34-10. So they're 4-3. And here's their remaining schedule. On the road at Mississippi State, that's a winnable game for Arkansas. This might be a very entertaining game, by the way. I know it's not on a lot of people's radar because these are 2 teams that aren't going to have any say-so or anything as far as what goes on in the postseason. But in terms of just an exciting game to watch offensively, this game they might score 70 or 80 points in this game. Then they come back home and play Ole Miss. And look, this Ole Miss game looks a lot more winnable for Arkansas right now than it did in the preseason, right? Ole Miss isn't as good as maybe a lot of people, myself included, thought they would be. Not that they're a terrible team. They're not, but they've got a couple of losses already that most people didn't see coming. And Arkansas, I think, is a little bit better. So this, whether you think Arkansas will beat Ole Miss or not, it looks more winnable than it did in August. Bye week, Texas, old school throwback Southwest Conference kind of rivalry game there. Texas is the better team. We'll see what happens there. Louisiana Tech should be a win. And then they finish up on the road at Missouri, another team like Ole Miss that is not nearly as good as sort of some people thought they might be in the offseason. A game that, again, looks more winnable now for Arkansas than it did back in the preseason. So sitting at 4 wins, Mississippi State could be a 5th win. Louisiana Tech could be a 6th win. And you got to assume they could win 2 out of 3, Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri. But even if they only win 1, they're getting to 7-5, which is almost double the win total from last year when they went 4-8. I guess I say all that to say, it looks to me like Sam Pittman probably will not get fired this season. I think if he comes close to doubling their win total, going from 4-8 at a place like Arkansas, I think Sam Pittman probably sticks around there for a while. Now, the question is going to be, what's going to happen with Bobby Petrino, right? It was kind of assumed that things aren't going well with Sam Pittman. Petrino was at A&M with Jimbo. Jimbo gets fired. Let's bring Petrino in, let him run the offense for a year under Sam Pittman, and then maybe, you kind of promote him to head coach when you sort of shove Pittman out the door after this season. That was sort of the thinking heading into the season. And for all I know, maybe that's still the case. Maybe Pittman is okay with sort of moving on somewhere else. I don't know. But from just a record standpoint, or how does the team look on the field standpoint, if you sort of take the Bobby Petrino angle out of it, I think Pittman has done enough to save his job if both Arkansas and Pittman want to continue down this path. I think he's done enough. I think he's done enough there to save his job. All right. Where else do we want to go here? Oh, here's one. Okay, let's talk about this one. Now, this one doesn't really give me any, I got to bring this one up. I didn't have this one pulled up yet. It doesn't give me any pleasure or anything to kind of bring this up. This is, it seems like we see a story like this in college football once a decade or so. Our buddy Mack Brown. Mack Brown's a national title winning head coach. Yeah, it was 20 years ago almost now back at Texas. But, even before that, he was at North Carolina when North Carolina was just a forgotten program, and he sort of brought them to prominence in college football. Not that he was winning national titles, but he made them a respectable program before he eventually took over the head coaching job at Texas, won a national title there. Didn't work out. Later on, after that, Texas gets rid of him. He ends up back at North Carolina, where I think potentially could have had a pretty good run. You had Drake May there. You had some good recruiting classes. You had some defensive studs. You had some wide receivers and some running backs with NFL talent. Never really lived up to it, at least to me, at North Carolina. And now this season has just been a total disaster. You look here, they started 3-0. They've now lost 4 in a row. And it's really that James Madison game that I don't think Mack Brown's going to be able to escape. 70-50, give up 70 to James Madison. And then the reports come out that at halftime of that game, Mack Brown actually was meeting with the team and went ahead and just told them at halftime, guys, I'm done. This isn't for me. I'm obviously not the right one to lead you to blah, 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 blah. Whatever happened between halftime and the post-game press conference, that story had then changed, and Mack Brown wasn't going to leave. So I think what we're looking at here with Mack Brown is sort of a show of respect from North Carolina. The guy's been coaching here for a long time. I don't think it's going to be a situation where, this Sunday or next Sunday or the Sunday after that, you get some kind of announcement or press conference from an athletic director that comes out and says, we've decided to fire Mack Brown. He's not winning enough. He's never going to do it. I don't see that happening because of the relationship Mack Brown and North Carolina have. This seems like a sort of ride off into the sunset situation for Mack Brown. They're going to let him coach the season out. I wouldn't be surprised if there's, if this is probably already worked out, would be my guess here. That this will be his last season, and kind of a mutual, you hear this, something that's, we've reached a mutual decision to part ways, that kind of thing. Kind of, the Bobby Bowden thing at Florida State. You kind of know it's time for you to move on, but you've done so much, we don't want to fire you. And the coach kind of still wants to keep coaching, but the school's like, no, we really thank you for what you did, but that kind of thing. It seems like that's what's going on here with North Carolina and Mack Brown. So my prediction for that would be that Mack Brown will not be the head coach of North Carolina next year. Not necessarily because he gets fired. I think it'll be a retirement, mutual decision type of thing made between Mack Brown and the school. All right, up next, this is another one that I've been on for a couple of years, and this kind of ties back to Florida a little bit because it's a cautionary tale here of what can happen if you overreact to one season. And maybe we'll just go straight to Florida State after that because they're guilty. They're guilty as charged. They're guilty as charged too. I'm talking about West Virginia. West Virginia coach Neil Brown has been bad since the day they hired him. There's just no disputing that, really. Now, West Virginia ended up having a really good record last year, in contrast to what their preseason projections were. They were predicted to win 2 or 3 games or something, and they ended up winning 8 or 9. I believe the plan was in place to fire Neil Brown last year. He had been really bad for multiple years in a row, and I believe the plan was to get rid of him last year. Well, then West Virginia comes out and wins 8 or 9 games. And, to tie this back into Florida, it was, with Billy Napier, it was kind of a foregone conclusion. A lot of people assumed he would be fired at the end of this season. And now, so my question, I guess, going back to the Florida thing is, of course, as a fan, you want Florida to win every game, right? But what if Billy Napier pulls off a couple of upsets here at the end of the year and you're sitting there at 8-4 and Florida decides to keep him? Will that change anyone's mind about the type of coach Billy Napier is? It shouldn't, I don't think. But that's what happened at West Virginia. They were all set to fire him. Out of the blue, he wins 8 or 9 games. And you're like, well, guess we can't fire him now. We got to keep him around. And now he's back to not being able to win a game again here the very next season. And I think that's the risk that a team like Florida runs if Billy Napier were to get to 8 wins, which I don't think is going to happen. But if it were, you're letting sort of one season define him as opposed to the overall body of work that you've seen from, in this case, Neil Brown or Florida or whatever. But so West Virginia's 3-4 this year. They lost to Penn State. They lost to Pitt. They lost to Iowa State. They got blown out by Kansas State. Now, they do have some winnable games down the stretch here because you've got some bad teams in the Big 12. Baylor. Central Florida is not as good as some people thought they would be. Cincinnati, that one's on the road. Tough for West Virginia there, but that's an upset they could potentially pull off at Arizona. So they're sitting at 3 wins. Can they get to bowl eligibility? They'd have to win 3 of their remaining games. I don't really look at any of these games and go, there's no way West Virginia's winning that game. Like, Arizona, like, I can't sit here and tell you that West Virginia's got no chance there, or Cincinnati, or Baylor, or UCF, or Texas Tech. But this is the problem. There's been a lot of games in the last 3 years under Neil Brown at West Virginia where you go, well, West Virginia's got a chance to win that one, and they don't win it. They haven't won enough of them over a 4-year period. So last year, okay, that's great. But now look, you're right back to sort of where you were before that. So I don't know. If I was a West Virginia fan, I would want Neil Brown gone. I don't think he's the right fit there. I don't think he will ever get West Virginia to where West Virginia fans want him to be. 60% chance they move on. I mean, I really don't know. I guess I would ask the West Virginia fans, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think should happen there with Neil Brown? Let's stick in the Big 12 here because, boy, this is a big swing and miss for your boy Uncle Lou here. I really liked Dave Aranda going back to his days as a coordinator. I really liked him. And I've seen a lot of coordinators become head coaches over the years. Some of them work out, some of them don't, right? For every Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning, there's a Will Muschamp and Dan Mullen, right? Some coordinators have what it takes to be a great coach. Some don't. It's not a slight on them. Being a head coach is a totally different job than being a coordinator. And being good at one doesn't necessarily make you good at the other. But I thought Dave Aranda was going to be a winner as a head coach, and that has not turned out to be the case at Baylor. It has been really, really bad. Another team here, Baylor, they're sitting on 3 wins over halfway through the season, and I think Dave Aranda could be on his way out. They lost to Utah. They lost to Colorado, lost to BYU. Now, to their credit, they've played all the best teams in the Big 12, with the exception of Kansas State, who they don't play this year. But, they've lost to BYU and Iowa State two out of the last 3 weeks. They're undefeated. But you look here, Texas Tech, you're getting blown out. This is the problem if you're Baylor, okay? Maybe you're not good enough to beat Iowa State and BYU this year. Maybe you're not good enough to beat the top of the conference this year, okay? That's one thing. But you're getting blown out by Texas Tech. That's a whole other thing. That's a whole other problem. Oklahoma State is playing better. I would pick Oklahoma State in this game right now, not Baylor. TCU, 50-50 there. At West Virginia, I'd probably pick West Virginia since the game is there. I know we just talked about Neil Brown. That's probably, the winner. How about is this a loser gets fired game? How about that? Why don't we do that? That sounds fair. Dave Aranda and Baylor on the road at Neil Brown in West Virginia, November 16th, a couple of weeks away, 3 weeks away. Loser gets fired. How about that? On the road at Houston and then home against Kansas. These two are winnable games here. So we'll see. But overall, I've been very disappointed in Dave Aranda. The few Baylor fans that I know and talk to have also been extremely disappointed in Dave Aranda. And I'm not saying Dave Aranda shouldn't get another opportunity as a head coach. Everybody deserves maybe a second chance or whatever. But it could be that we are looking at with Dave Aranda what we have seen before with some other coordinators, which is really good coordinator, maybe not cut out to be a head coach. This one it has blown my mind every single time anyone has ever mentioned it in any given year. It continues to blow my mind, but I continue to hear people talk about this one. This was not on my preseason list of hot seat coaches. This coach is not on my hot seat now, but every single time. Sorry, I'm pulling up their schedule. Every single time I talk about coaches on the hot seat, or which coaches should be on the hot seat, or which coaches do you have on the hot seat, people always want to mention this guy's name, Ryan Day at Ohio State. He has the highest winning percentage of any active coach in the country. And look, I understand. They got a loaded roster every single year. They've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. They haven't won the Big Ten in 3 years. They haven't won a playoff game since whenever it was, 2019 or 2020. I understand all that. And we're Ohio State, and we deserve better. I completely get it. I completely understand. He does need to beat Michigan. He does need to win the Big Ten. And in the era of a 12-team playoff, Ohio State should be in it every single year. Period. I agree with all of those things. I cannot agree that a guy should be fired for losing one game. This guy averages less than 2 losses a year. He averages less than 2 losses a year. I don't know who you think you're going to get in there that's I don't know. So, look, and I've given Ryan Day all kinds of shit on this channel over things I felt like he deserved. A few years ago, Ohio State's defense was not up to where it should have been. It just wasn't. They bring in a new defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles, and there has been an obvious big-time improvement on the defensive side of the ball at Ohio State over the last couple of years. And if you can't see that, then you're just blind. And even this morning, I hear people talking about they need to fire Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator. I know you lost to Oregon and you gave up 30 points or whatever it was, and you lost to Michigan last year, and both of those losses are with Jim Knowles as defensive. I get all that. Here's the reality, though. Just because a really good offense scores some points on you doesn't mean your defense is bad or your defensive coordinator is bad. Let me ask you something, Ohio State, man. I'm being dead serious, because here's the thing. There's a lot of Ohio State people who want Jim Knowles fired, Ryan Day fired, whatever the case. This isn't like people from the outside going, oh, Ryan Day's a joke, they need to fire him. No, there is some of that. But let me ask you something. I'm being in serious question, and I know we've had our back and forths, me and the Ohio State fans, but I'm just going to ask you seriously, just as a example question here. Just in general, I'm not talking about any specific year or any specific game. If I just asked you in general, would you say that under Kirby Smart, Georgia's had a pretty good defense? A defense that you would like to have, or that any team would be happy to have? I would say, yeah. Generally speaking, Georgia puts a really good defense on the field that's loaded with NFL talent. They win a ton again, the whole deal, right? For years, Ohio State tried to get to where Georgia was defensively. Now, Ohio State was way ahead of Georgia offensively. I'm not comparing teams. This isn't a shit-talking thing, all right? Most people, whether they love Georgia, hate Georgia, indifferent towards Georgia, okay, will agree that Georgia has been one of the best defensive programs in America over the last 8 or 9 years. And I think that's fair to say, and I think almost everybody watching would agree with that, including the Ohio State people that are watching, right? Okay. When Georgia played Ohio State, how many points did you score? I'm not talking about the fact that you lost the game. What I'm saying is you losing to Oregon or giving up 30 points to Oregon is not some kind of proof that your defense isn't any good and you need to get rid of Jim Knowles. Do you not remember how bad your defense was 2, 3, 4 years ago, pre-Jim Knowles, compared to what it is now? Do you not remember that? Georgia had a really good defense that year. Ohio State scored damn near half 100 on them. Good offenses sometimes are gonna score on good defenses, and that's what happened with Oregon. And Oregon didn't score 50; they scored 30 or whatever the final score was. Ohio State doesn't need to make. I don't think Ohio State needs to make any coaching changes at all. You lost by 1 point on the road to the number 1 ranked team in the country right now. The amount of, I know we overreact all the time. By we, I just mean college football fans in general. The fire Ryan Day and the fire Jim Knowles people are the biggest case of fan being short for fanatic and overreaction that maybe I've ever seen in the history of this channel. But Ohio State is 5-1. Okay, they're 5-1. They lost to Oregon by 1 point. You gave it 32 points. Okay, so what? So what? Next time, score 33, and you probably will. If you play Oregon in the Big Ten title game, guess who's going to be favored? And I know that doesn't matter in terms of who wins. The underdogs win all the time. You're going to be favored against Oregon. If you played them tomorrow, next week, a month from now, you're going to be favored. And you might beat them, you might not. I'm not here to make a prediction on that, but boy, y'all so quick to fire people. Nebraska win at Penn State. That'd be a good game. If I had to pick right now, I'd go with Ohio State. Purdue win, Northwestern win. Indiana, again, one of the biggest surprises of the year. Ohio State gets them at home. I like Ohio State there. And then Michigan's terrible. You will get your win over Michigan. Aren't you going 11-1 and playing Oregon again in December? But all I hear is let's fire Jim Knowles and we got to get rid of Ryan Day. I don't understand it. So I am not a part of that. I wasn't a part of it in the offseason. You look up hot seat lists now. He's on there now. I'm like, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. All right, so we talked about Billy Napier, Ryan Day, Clark Lee, Sam Pittman, Dave Aranda, Neil Brown, and Mack Brown. I've got a couple more. There's 3 more names I want to talk about. These names, generally speaking, weren't on anybody's hot seat list in the offseason. One of them got a little bit of sort of pull in that direction, I guess. I want to talk about Mike Norvell, Lincoln Riley, and Brent Venables. Speaking for myself, I'm done with all 3 of these as a head coach. I'm just telling you right now. I wouldn't want any of these 3 people anywhere near my program as a head coach. Period. I've seen enough from all of them. We'll start with Lincoln Riley since he's been around the longest, at least in terms of a power conference head coach. I don't care how many Heisman quarterbacks he recruits and signs and plays and hands them the Heisman trophy. Doesn't matter to me. I'm convinced Lincoln Riley will never win anything of significance beyond a conference championship game. And even that at this point looks extremely unlikely, considering the fact that they are in a complete tailspin, nosedive, whatever you want to call it, and are now in the Big Ten Conference, not the Pac-12. I think Lincoln Riley's best days are behind him as a college head coach. I think he needs to do one or two things. Bolt now for the NFL, which has coveted Lincoln Riley over the years, whether that would be as a head coach or an offensive coordinator, potentially becoming a head coach later. I don't know. Or he needs, if he's going to stay in college, I don't know who would hire him as a head coach at this point. I don't think, at this point, I would be shocked if Lincoln Riley got another opportunity at a quote-unquote major program. So by that, I mean, obviously, any blue blood program. He's been the head coach of 2 different blue blood programs. He can't put a defense on the field. Not in 1 year, not in a couple of years. We're talking 8, 9 years. This guy's been a head coach at 2 of the most storied programs in the history of college football, and not one time has he put a respectable defense on the field. Not once. Despite all the press conferences, all the coaching changes, all the promises made, the football season starts and their defensive line is terrible. Rinse and repeat. He needs to go back to being an offensive coordinator either in college, or he needs to bolt for the NFL, whether that be a head coach or an offensive coordinator job with plans to become a head coach. I don't know. I've seen enough of Lincoln Riley, and I think Lincoln Riley is in some trouble of getting fired potentially this year. Let's look at let's take a look here, because it's not pretty for Southern Cal. They're 3-4. They're coming off back-to-back bad not back-to-back bad losses, but they lost to Minnesota and they lost to Maryland. Sandwiched in between there, they lost to Penn State. But Penn State's a top 5, top 10 team. So, again, not that that's acceptable. There's no such thing as an acceptable loss when you're Southern Cal, but that's not an embarrassing loss. I guess I'll put it that way. But the fact that in year 3, and that's what you have to remember, this isn't Lincoln Riley's first year. He didn't just get off the boat in Los Angeles, okay? He's in year 3, and he can't beat teams like Minnesota and Maryland. And the problem is he keeps having these leads in the fourth quarter, and they blow it. That's a sign of bad coaching. He's got players quitting on the defensive side of the ball that want to transfer out halfway through the season. It's a complete mess yet again. So here we go. They're 3-4 with 5 games to go. He needs 3 more wins just to make a bowl game. I don't know if they're going to beat Rutgers this weekend. And for some reason, they're almost a 2-touchdown favorite at home against Rutgers. I don't know. At Washington, they could lose that one. Nebraska, they could lose that one. Notre Dame, they are losing that one. They're going to have to find a way to beat UCLA and then 2 of these teams, Nebraska, Washington, Rutgers, just to get bowl eligible. Just to get bowl eligible. This is his 3rd year. He's gotten worse every single year. Go back to his first year at Southern Cal, 2022. They made the Pac-12 title game. Now, they lost to Utah. Why? Utah's a physical team. Same reason they lost to them in the regular season. They lost to Utah in the regular season. They lost to them in the Pac-12 championship game. They ain't got humiliated by a group of 5 team in a New Year's Six Bowl, the Cotton Bowl. But they went 11-3. That's respectable for a first-year guy at Southern Cal, given what he inherited there. Now, he turned the roster over through portal, but you get the point. The following year, 2023, which ended up being the last year of the Pac-12, huge step backwards. 8-5. 8-5. Started off hot. Won 6 games in a row. Then couldn't beat anybody. Lost to Notre Dame. Lost to Utah. Lost to Washington. Lost to Oregon. Lost to UCLA. But even that, 8-5. Now, year 3. We just looked at it. They're 3-4. And there aren't 3 wins left on this schedule. They're going 5-7. They're getting worse every year, year 3. I've seen enough from Lincoln Riley. I don't know. I don't talk to a ton of Southern Cal fans for whatever reason. I don't know what y'all feel about it. I've seen enough from Lincoln Riley. I think Southern Cal needs to hit the eject button on that. Mike Norvell. I don't think Florida State's firing Mike Norvell. Should they? Yes. This is Mike Norvell's 5th season at Florida State. 3 of the 5 seasons, he's got a losing record. He had a losing record in each of his first 2 seasons. In his 3rd season, it wasn't great, but they went on a run in the second half of the season, and at least it wasn't a losing record. Year 4 was last year. They won the ACC. We know all the stuff that happened around that, and now here we are, year 5. He turned the roster over with NIL, and it didn't work this time. It's been working the last couple of years. He struck gold with a couple of portal players and put a decent product on the field. This year, Florida State has one of the worst football teams maybe that they've ever had. They're really 1-7. They should be 0-8, a miracle that they beat Cal. First time they lost to Duke this past week. It's the first time Florida State has ever lost to Duke, ever. They had 3 turnovers on 3 consecutive offensive plays. They've played 3 different quarterbacks this year. None of them are any good. There doesn't appear to be any hope. Where's the light at the end of the tunnel for Florida State and Mike Norvell? If you want to keep him around, why? What is it you think he's bringing in? The recruiting class is falling apart for the 2025 cycle. It seems like every other week there's a decommitment from there. And after watching what you're seeing on the field, do you blame them? No, and it's probably going to get worse. I don't think Florida State will fire Mike Norvell because they overreacted. He had 1 good season last year. What'd they do? Gave him a Jimbo Fisher contract. Mike Norvell is currently under contract, 8 years, $10 million a year. 8-year, $10 million a year. He's got $80 million contract. His buyout's about 60-something million. They can't afford that because they're wasting all their money on lawyers' fees for frivolous lawsuits against their own conference and their own TV partner. They're begging everybody for money, including Wall Street. They basically want to sell their own football program to Wall Street. It's just a complete mess down there. So I think they should fire Mike Norvell. I don't think they will. And the last one is Brent Venables. And unfortunately, I've seen enough of Brent Venables as well. Some people are great coordinators. Brent Venables is one of those people. But like Dave Aranda, he's not head coach material. It is an absolute disaster what is going on in Norman, Oklahoma right now. There is no reason under any circumstances in any random year ever that Oklahoma should be the worst team in the SEC, but that's what they are. I know they beat Auburn. It was a miracle pick 6 at the end of the game. And if Auburn and Oklahoma played tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, like a baseball series, Auburn would sweep them 3-0. Oklahoma is the worst team in the SEC. And again, where's the light at the end of the tunnel? They ran off Dylan Gabriel, who, by the way, is a Heisman front runner this year at Oregon. They ran him off, and they ran off their offensive coordinator, Jeff Lebby, who's now at Mississippi State putting up 31 points on UGA. That's 5 games worth of points if you're Oklahoma. They're averaging 7-8 points a game offensively. They're an absolute disaster. You run off Dylan Gabriel because you got Jackson Arnold waiting in the wings. He gets to start this year. He can't complete a pass from here to there. It's just terrible. So what do? You bench him for another freshman. That freshman comes in. He's not any better. Now you're doing the quarterback hokey pokey where you're playing them both in each game. You've now announced that you're going back to Jackson Arnold as a starter. Guess what's happening as soon as the portal opens in December? One, if not both, of those guys are gone. So your plan for the future of the quarterback position is completely out the window. You're in year 3, and you've got no idea or no plan even who your quarterback will be next year, which is the single most important piece of any football program anywhere. Your offensive line is horrendous. Yeah, the defense at Oklahoma is better today than it was under Lincoln Riley. That's not really a shock. It's not a top 5 defense. It's not top 10. It's decent. But again, compared to where you were at, almost anything would have been an improvement. Brent Venables should be fired as the head coach of Oklahoma. It's not working out. I don't know what else anybody needs to see. Do we even need to pull up the schedule? I mean, they might not win another game. We'll pull the schedule up. They are bad. It's shocking to me how bad Oklahoma is. I caught a lot of heat in the offseason because I think I picked them to go 7-5. Oklahoma fans lost their mind. Oh, winning 9-10 games, beating Texas, SEC championship, definitely in a 12-team playoff, blah, blah, blah. Y'all are horrific. Horrific. Here's the thing. When you're Oklahoma or Texas or Georgia or Bama or Florida, whatever, your down year, you should be middle of the pack in the SEC. In a down year. In the case of your down year, you're literally the worst team in the SEC. Florida with Billy Napier. Well, we're just in our down years. Down years are 7-5. 8-4, those are down years. They're 4-3, all right? At Ole Miss, loss. They'll beat Maine, I guess. At Missouri, loss. Bama, loss. LSU, loss. They're winning one more game. They're winning. They're beating Maine. That's it. They're not scoring on anybody else. They're not scoring on Ole Miss or Mizzou or Bama or LSU. They're not. You're going 5-7 in year 3. And year 4 might be worse. Here, you know what? Your schedule's the same. Now, I don't know what your non-con schedule is, so let's throw that out for now. But it can't be any easier than it was this year. Temple, Houston, and Tulane. Give me a break with that non-con schedule. And Maine. So I don't know what your non-con schedule is for next year, but your conference schedule is exactly the same as it is this year. You just swap the home and away games. So guess what? You got to play at Tennessee next year. I don't need to know anything about that to know that you're losing that game next year. Home against Auburn. If they get a quarterback, you'll lose. Texas, you're going to lose. At South Carolina, they just beat you by 30. In Oklahoma, you're going to lose that one. Home against Ole Miss. We'll have to wait and see what happens with Lane Kiffin. But if Lane Kiffin's there, you're losing that. Home against Missouri, 50-50. On the road at Alabama next year, loss. Home against LSU, loss. What are you winning? One SEC game next year? Y'all better get rid of Venables quick, fast, and in a hurry. This isn't a problem that's going to fix itself. You don't get to beat up on Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas for half the year. Have a great day.